Hello, everyone. All right, let's get right into this. Paul actually mentioned a couple things, beautifully teeing up my talk for me. But it works on my machine. That's actually the title. So I love this quote from Gartner. The continuous nature of web-scale software deployment really brings development to me into the fore. And I think we saw that in what Michael was showing as well with that continuum, in what Chris was talking about, in some of the excitement around the development team about deploying. Really, every developer I've ever met in my life has wanted nothing more than to build great features, see them get into the world, and be adopted by as many people as possible. What's interesting, though, is while all of this seems self-evident, what the developers actually put up with and do is insane in comparison. This, I imagine some of you will at least recognize them. These are wiki pages from the internet on how to actually set up very common frameworks with very common IDEs or platforms. You have to follow each one of these individual steps, which you can't even read because there are too many of them, and try not to make a mistake, otherwise it won't work, and then you have to start again after clearing out all of your state. It's really bizarre to me that a community that builds great process software and efficiency for everyone else puts up with this kind of stuff for their own development world. Now, continuous delivery is all about repeatability. It's about predictability. It's about getting these things from up here, out there, in a format with as little disruption as possible. But the developer workspace is interesting because the developer workspace, to some degree, needs to be flexible. It needs to be individual. But there has to be some amount of visibility. There has to be some amount of codification that allows it to still be shareable, that allows us to have a conversation as developers where it doesn't just quickly devolve into, yeah, but it works on my machine, so obviously you did something wrong. So does containerizing the developer workspaces solve the problem? It, as Paul said, certainly helps in CI, it helps in continuous delivery. It partially solves the problem, I think, in the developer workspace. Certainly it gives you isolation, and that isolation doesn't necessarily depend just on the isolation of my physical laptop. It gives you partial repeatability, but it doesn't really do this, and I'll get into this a little bit more later, but running and debugging environments are fine. No IDE plugins, no code formatting, source code authorization, unique word flows, blah, 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 blah. There's a lot of other stuff that goes into the developer workspace, that goes into everything that we need as developers to do what we do. Immutability, as I just alluded to, is a real problem because as I'm changing the architecture of my app, as I'm adding to new services, as I'm connecting to new APIs, I need some flexibility to change the stack, to change the structure and the components within my developer workbench. So how do I reconcile these things which very soon in the life cycle, when it hits CI, when it goes further into CD, become must-haves? It's got to be immutable, it's got to be repeatable, it's got to be isolated. How do I reconcile that with what I need in development? The wiki is not the right way. So to us at Codenvy, the goal really is to allow you to take any commit point or any version of your application and build, run, and deploy it from anywhere. And this gets a little bit to something that Paul talked about as an open problem, is that you've got the containers, which do a very good job of codifying the running environment. They can be situated beside your source code, but people are not used to thinking in those terms. They're not used to thinking of the environment as versioned and committed along with the code. And there's really no mechanism for doing that. So the mechanism that we've created has two parts. One of them is a much broader and overarching encapsulation of the developer workspace into a recipe. This doesn't mean that you lose flexibility. It doesn't mean one stack to rule them all. What it means is bubbling up the details of everything we use as our developer workbench in a way that is visible to everybody else working on that project. The same way that we all have code, we can all make changes to the code, and those code changes can be visible to everyone, reconciled by everyone, merged by anyone, and in that way, the visibility allows us to make better choices as a team. Now imagine taking that same concept and extending it to the build environment and everything that is configured as part of that. to the IDE environment and all the plugins, code formatting, and everything else that is part of that, to the various debugging environments, running environments that may be required, the integration environments that may be required. If all of those things could be put together into a recipe that is human readable and machine automatable, and that connected properly to all the various components in the developer workspace, now you have a mechanism by which you can share a project among developers to create predictable, repeatable development that doesn't box you in, that doesn't kind of force you to compromise. The second part of this, though, is the part that CI, I think, has done a phenomenal job on, and that Chris talked kind of as a leitmotif through his whole presentation, is automation. If it's not automatable, why are you doing it? We don't need more manual processes. So you need to be able to take these recipes and then feed them into an automation engine which is going to parse them out and is going to allow them to control the life cycle of these developer workspaces as a whole, stem to stern. So it's going to take care of brokering authentication, connecting to corporate systems, provisioning these, sharing these, destroying these. And then because the applications that we're all working on keep getting bigger, keep getting more powerful, keep getting more interconnected. Think about the microservices again, from Nike, going from a giant single stack to 34 microservices to, I'll wager, in 5 years, many more than 35 microservices. As a developer, I shouldn't be limited to whether I can run only a piece of the stack because my VM can only has the power to do that. I should be able to distribute all of these functions from my development project across an elastic microservices infrastructure. That means that I can choose at will the size of the environment I need for my developer workspace. Am I working on a piece of code that needs to integrate with all 35 microservices, and therefore I need to run all 35 simultaneously to really know if my code change has worked? Great, do it. I shouldn't need to ask somebody for a VM, wait 2 weeks while they build it, another 2 weeks while they hand me the keys, blah, blah, blah. Now at Intuit, and Jeff Brewer from Intuit is here, he can talk to you about the gory details, but using this system, we ran a 4,000 developer hackathon on 17 AWS nodes, but the important thing about that, I think the exciting thing about that is that the developers who came from around the world for, I think it was 1 week, right, Jeff? Literally from all points, to come together for 1 week, one precious week to code together, spent literally 0 seconds setting up their dev environments. They were able to jump in together into environments pre-set up and ready to go and could spend 100% of that week being creative, being collaborative, helping each other get better, and not wasting time setting things up. So to me, what this boils down to is that when we think about continuous delivery, there's a habit, and I think you see it in the terminology, CI/CD, 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 to think of it as it goes from the code commit out. But it doesn't. The thing that you're continuously delivering is the app which the developers build. It needs to start with the developer. And if you're not working to codify that developer environment, if you're not working to add automation to the development portion of this, then really you're, to borrow Michael's phrase, you're not worried about the fattest Boy Scout. You got to watch out for that part of the development which takes the longest, which in every company I've ever been has been the development, not the deployment. Anyway, some stuff to think about. I will be over there if you want to talk about it more. Thank you very much.